Hi everyone, I'm just going to pull this chair over and I'm going to sit because I've been on my feet all day.
And you can be right on level with us this way.
Great, yes. Thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be back and to see so many familiar faces. So I'm going to talk about the ways that I ferment a little bit tonight. I brought some of my gear with me and I'll talk through a few of the things that I've brought along and how I've made them. You can have a smell. We can crack open some of the bottles and have a whiff. I'm not going to allow you to taste them tonight because they're not ready, but you can use your imagination. And what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to actually read some of my diary entries because I write a lot about what I do when I'm in the forest and a lot about my processes and how I sort of do things. So I'm going to start just with a little reading that just gives you a little bit of a background as to why I'm into fermentation and why I do it. So I wrote this when I went on a camping trip back on the 6th of January this year. The patience in untangling fairy lights. A child is screaming somewhere in the campground. I spilled my bourbon and Coke on a rock as a blue kingfisher flew silently by. The white noise of the river makes my ears ring. I'm going to need to visit the drop toilet facilities at some point, which I'm not looking forward to. The parents who are camping next to me scream at their children. The dad's cough sounds really bad. Their light brown dog wanders around the campground, sniffing here and there, barking at the birds in the distant trees. There is a deep, calm section in the Telagri River and I strip down to bathe. I discover a leech attached to my leg almost halfway down my sock and my mouth issues a soft shriek. I remove it and say goodbye. The volume of the cicadas' calls in the distance slowly undulates. The river sediments stick to my feet as I wander past the weeds growing near the riverside. I've been thinking about surrender a little bit of late, what it means to surrender, how it feels to surrender. I first had this thought while I was snorkeling at Newcastle Beach. I think I was alone or possibly with Trent, far, far out the back in a deep section where the rock shelf drops away. I was experimenting with being completely vertical in the water column, completely relaxed and upside down, not trying to swim anywhere, not trying to be the right way up, just suspended upside down, slowly being pulled down deeper by the weight belt around my waist. It was disorienting to stare at the expanse of the ocean where the sky is supposed to be, so I closed my eyes and just surrendered to it, just hanging there like a sleeping jellyfish. The muscles in my spine eventually relaxing and releasing a sense of bliss. As I stand here now, watching the river flow, I'm taken back to this moment of complete surrender. Here, the water tumbles around the rocks, kissing their necks, cascading effortlessly around them. How do I flow around the obstacles in my life rather than try to overcome them? How can I surrender myself to the shape of the rocks while smoothing down their sharp edges? For the river rocks are hard, but the water is patient. The cool breeze tickles the loose hairs against my brow, strands which had escaped the grip of my hair tie while I was immersed in the freezing fresh water. This is Warramai, Biripi and Gawagal people's land. I was looking for a spot in the river for us to conduct a special ritual of making mead, an ancient type of alcohol. Of all the ferments that I make, the mead making ritual is the most performative and inclusive. There are 4 essential ingredients which are required to make a successfully fermenting batch of mead or honey wine. You need honey, special water, fresh air, and lots of stirring and good intentions. It helps if it's performative and if you've had a couple of drinks. Firstly, the honey. I bought a few kilos of fresh honey from a lovely old farmer in the valley. Honey is one of the coolest substances on the planet. The way that it flows and oozes is indulgent and sumptuous. Millions of flowers from across a landscape concentrated. And it's not just nectar, it's a concoction of pollen, acids, scents, a curated collection of plant secretions and complex molecules. Unique bacteria and yeasts from the bellies of thousands of female worker bees. It's liquid sunlight, a landscape distilled into a glass jar. It was a new moon and it was pitch black. We stumbled down the steep banks to the water's edge, guided by a single tiny LED head torch. We stripped down nude, entered the water, and placed my special bowl atop a flat rock in the middle of the river. We turned off the light and waited for our eyes to adjust in the darkness. We surrounded the bowl on all sides and splashed water into the bowl from all directions until it was overflowing. The communal process of throwing water was really nice. We made special water together. The second ingredient for forest mead. You can't just use any old tap water. You have to involve others and you have to make it fun. By throwing the water around and splashing it, we added the third ingredient, oxygen. The water was already oxygenated from the rapids and tumbles in the river upstream, but now it was supercharged. I then carried my wide, special shallow bowl back to the campsite. I did my absolute best to not spill a single drop as I navigated the slippery rocks in the pitch black in the nude with my arms outstretched. We placed the bowl atop an altar made with beautiful wet stones of all colours, soft fern fronds, bright red gum leaves which curled and shriveled as they dried. We sprinkled tiny purple flowers, arranged sandpaper figs, false capsicum fruits, wild raspberry flowers and colourful feathers that we collected from the forest floor. The altar was surrounded by ribbons of bark, which curled up like cinnamon scrolls. Next step, we add the honey. As I pour, I slowly stand up and stretch the flowing stream of honey up high, standing on my tiptoes. Next, we add the fourth and final ingredient, care. In order for fermentation to start successfully, it needs regular stirring, agitation, gratitude, enthusiasm for the process. I add the wild figs, flowers, a clean stone, and a few leaves to the honey water. We all take turns to stir, adding our good thoughts and intentions to the magical brew. There are bits and bugs and dirt in there, but it doesn't matter at this point. We want to invite all the life to break through the surface tension and access the energy-rich liquid. It's then left in front of the fire to be warmed slightly and to breathe in some of the campfire smoke. I feel proud for what we have created. I feel the most comfortable that I've ever been in the forest, and I did it while I was with friends. The mead is now happily fermenting at home underneath an airlock, as I knew it would, gurgling, burping, honey and water being transformed by wild bacteria and yeasts into a delicious and intoxicating elixir. It's easily the most wild mead that I've ever made. I didn't filter the water or sterilize any of my equipment. I just went full forest energy, full witch. And in about 12 months, it'll be ready to drink. So, thanks. So that's how it started. You know, it starts with fun, you know, like when you think about fermentation and doing stuff, like a lot of people freak out because, oh, I've got to follow the recipe and I've got to make it, you know, I've got to make the kombucha with exactly this and exactly that, or I'm going to kill it. And if you're talking about brewing, you know, you've got to have cleaning chemicals and you've got to have this and you've got to have that and da-da-da-da. And it's not about that. It's about fun. It's about starting with some fun ingredients, some special ingredients, and just literally making the right environment for the wild bacteria and yeasts to come alive, and you will get fermentation. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is all wild ferments, except for one, which is in there. So in these two carboys here is the mead that I made. So any of you, I would encourage you to make mead. It's so easy. You just get 1 part of honey and 4 to 11 parts of water. Depending on how much water will just create different alcohol content. But the sweet spot for me is 1 part honey to 4 or 5 parts water. And just like in that diary entry that I read to you, you just mix it around and it will start to ferment. You don't need to add yeast or yeast nutrient or, you know, anything that's in a packet, because honey is literally ready to go. There's already bacteria and yeast and pollen and bits and pieces in there that will just ferment spontaneously on your own. So you mix it with water, you put it in an airlock like that, once you know it's definitely fermented, and in 12 months' time, that'll be ready to drink. So this will sort of just be about kind of how I do things. So please jump in at any point. I'm going to talk you through mead. I'm going to talk you through wild catalysts. So when I say wild catalysts, I mean the sources of fermentation, bacteria and yeast. Does anyone have an idea of what some might be?
I make a ginger ale regularly, so there's stuff on the outside. It has to be the outside of the ginger. It has to have the skin there.
Yep.
So that would be one.
Yep, that's a wild ferment for sure. Yep. What's the source of bacteria and yeast?
Yeah.
Yes. So glad to hear you say that. It's literally in the air you breathe. In your kitchen, have you ever made a loaf of bread? Chances are that some of the, as the water in the loaf evaporated, it probably took some of the yeast away and it settled on a wall somewhere. But yeast will populate everything. It's on your skin. It's in the sugar on your shelf. It's just sitting there waiting for the sugar to be unlocked. A blueberry, when you get it from the shop, if it's a decent blueberry, it will have like a sort of like a pale white bloom on it. Yeah. That's a bit of wax and some other bits and pieces, but there's yeast in there as well. So the same thing with grapes. So if you get fresh organic grapes, they've got that sort of dusty white coating on them. That's wild yeast. So if you're making wine, you don't need to add yeast because the yeast is already on the grape. It's literally on the grape, waiting for the grape to be ripe and fall off and get squished to ferment it and turn it, to break it down and to start the fermentation process.
One of the things you were pointing out is organic. The things it has to be organic. Like you can't say make tapachi with non-organic pineapple skins. So many, even I wouldn't do a ginger ale with non-organic ginger because they treat it with different chemicals and things like that just for storage, and they don't tend to have the wild yeasts on them.
I wouldn't say you can't, because you can. I would say that you can choose to, but you can still make tapachi with an inorganic pineapple. All you need to do is add yeast. You just need to add it from another source. Yeah. But I'll come back to the mead making process. So I'll just walk you through that from start to finish. So you get your honey and your water, you mix it together, and every day you would just whisk it, just mix it really, really vigorously. And I was hoping that this was my little test run that I made about a week ago. I was hoping that would have started fermenting, but it's been a bit too cold and it's a bit more difficult to sort of court and sort of care for the bacteria and yeasts when there's not a lot of activity. So if I had been more well prepared, I would have put this on the shelf maybe 3 weeks ago rather than 1. And after maybe like in the summertime, maybe 10 to 14 days, you'll start to notice little tiny bubbles starting to form on the top of there. They'll be really, really small when they first begin. Actually, Scott, I've got some pictures of the fermentation when it's just started on the computer if you want to bring that up. If you like, yeah. But they'll be really, really small when it starts. And you just have to keep trusting the process and stir it in because that will make it all come to life. So after maybe 10 to 24 days, you will start to develop like a foam on the top of the brew. And that's when it's ready to go from that home, when it's really active and you can see the bubbles, to go into one of those carboys like that. Yeah. And then from there, that will ferment in there for 6 to 12 months. The question of how long depends on how sweet you like your wine. So if you like a really, really sweet, like Moscato, you might wait 6 months. Or if you like a really dry Chardonnay, you might wait 1 year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. But you don't need to do much more than that. You just put it in a carboy and that will ferment until it can't ferment anymore, until it's completely dry. You can probably all see the bottom, or maybe not. You can see in the bottom of them, there's a little bit of sediment. If you want to be really fancy, you can pour all the mead off into another container and clean it out and get rid of that yeast and then put it back in again. And what that will do is will sort of reduce some of those sort of Vegemite kind of beer sort of flavor notes and make it a bit more clean tasting. The other thing that happens when you age is that flavors deepen and develop and become more balanced. So the longer you leave it, it's just like wine. It just gets tastier and yeah. Yeah.
Alcohol content?
I haven't tested it, and I probably wouldn't because I can't be bothered. But I would say it would be between maybe 7 and maybe 15%. Yeah. So if you want to measure alcohol content, it's really easy. It's just an equation. So you just get a thing called a hydrometer, or you can also get a yeah, you can see it up the top on the right. You can get another one, what's it called? And you look up to it and it's got a little thing you drop on it. That's it. You can also use a refractometer to measure the specific gravity at the beginning of the ferment and then at the end of the ferment. And then you just do a little calculation and it will spit out your alcohol content. But I've been making beer and wine for so long now that I just sort of don't care. It's yummy.
When you agitate it, do you have to do it for so long, like 10 minutes, 5 minutes? Or just skip it?
That's a good question. When
Do you have to do it naked or?
you've got to do it naked. No. The reason why I wanted to tell that story is because it's literally an art form. You know, there are people that I know that have been fermenting for ages and they will do things completely different to me. You know, I've been fermenting for a long time and I started off with all the simple things and then I just threw out the rule book and just started making them just off the top of my head. And when you've done it enough, when you've made enough batches of basic beer or you've done enough batches of kimchi or sauerkraut or whatever you want, you'll develop enough confidence to start making it up. And I really encourage you to make it up because that's when it's really fun, because you get spectacular failures, but you also get spectacular successes. So, but back to your question about stirring. The most important thing when you're trying to make mead in the beginning process is you want to bring the air and the bacteria in the air and on the surfaces of whatever ingredients you're putting there, you want to mix them in and agitate them. So if you have a lid on it, it's not going to ferment unless you're using really fresh honey. If you have a lid off it, bugs are going to get in because it smells delicious and it tastes delicious. So you've got to stir it with obviously nothing on it and give it a really, really good whisk to get the air in it and to agitate it, but then you've got to keep it covered. So you just put like a piece of cheesecloth or a piece of cloth that's thick enough that you can't see through it. Because if you can see through it, there's probably a bug that's small enough that can get in it. Yeah. But as for stirring, stir, 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 stir. Every day, multiple times a day. And if you do it naked, I feel like it's got more, it's more fun. It's more fun that way.
Could you just sit the lid on top? Or
No. No.
It's
It's got to be off. It's all bacteria has got to be able to circulate. The air's got to be able to circulate through it. So when I went camping, I put it in a very cool special ceramic bowl that I'd made ferments in it before. So it was already impregnated with all the different bacteria from the previous batches that I've made. And it was in a forest. It was in a breezy day. Like we used water from the river. Like there was already so much stuff going on there. And the reason why I did that is because the water was really pure. It was in a really beautiful part of the world that I knew that there wasn't anything nasty upstream. And I sort of just didn't care because I have a fair bit of confidence now. Yeah.
Can you wind that back a bit? You were saying between batches you didn't rinse and sterilize with carboys and stuff.
Oh no, the bowl. So the bowl where I started it. So when I went into the water and I collected the water, that bowl. Yeah. So to get it started, you kind of need to be fairly open-minded. Like my opinion on this is probably going to be really different to like a professional winemaker, because they would say it's all got to be sterilized. It's all got to be very like, no, because that's an industrialized process. But for you, if you're thinking about starting fermentation, start with the easy stuff. Start with the homebrew kits that you can get at home. Start with kombucha, start with sauerkraut, the basic stuff, and then you can start to experiment. Yeah. What was your original question?
Because I sort of go overboard with sterilising and using, yeast quite commercially.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of meetings, and I've known you can do the natural ferments, but I've always just like, I'm going to put yeast and shop to give you that confidence to think it's not going to be very sour. I've had some beers that are very sour before, and you can drink it, but because you can't poison yourself with beer. Bad yeast and things, but it's very fun flavors.
Look, it's all about the environment that you provide. So I'll give you the example of beer. So beer is very watery. And when you ferment beer, it produces an amount of alcohol that's suspended in a lot of water. So you've kind of got this vacuum of space that is just wanting to ferment into its next thing. It just wants to continue through stages of entropy until it can just be rotten in the bottle, So what you're creating there is an environment where there are lots of other things that can get in. So if you're making it in a barrel like that you haven't cleaned properly, or you're putting it into dirty bottles, then there's already going to be stuff in there that, because it's sitting in that bottle for so long, it's going to turn it sour. The reason why this works is because the environment that I've got in that carboy there is selective. So by having it under a layer of carbon dioxide, it actually pushes out and resists infection from vinegars. So the airlock on the top there lets all the carbon dioxide come out, but no oxygen can get in there once it's fermenting. So by being in that carboy there, the yeasts are able to take up as much space as they want, and they can fill it up and they can outcompete the vinegar producing bacteria. It also makes a big difference if you're using honey that's got lots of diversity in it. So if you've got really strong yeasts, it means that it's more resistant to vinegar. The other thing that will turn mead sour is if you put it into a bottle and then you drink half of it and it's half full of air. That's when it will turn sour. Yeah, I've made mead maybe like big batches of mead, maybe like 5 times or 6 times. And I've never had a sour batch because I've always kept my bottles sealed and broken it up into smaller portions and always had the whole bottle of wine with friends one night, rather than leaving a big vessel that's half full of air. Yeah, but also like when you're doing wild ferments, like you're going to go sour. That's just how life is when you're doing wild ferments. I've just been very lucky, I guess. Yeah. Any more questions about mead?
Do you do many flavoured ones?
Yes, flavoured ones are really fun. I did a pear and black pepper, and I did a ginger and maybe some sort of citrus. What else have I done? I've done clove. Clove is really good. Clove and honey.
I did an
I think that's it.
espresso one and added cacao nibs as the nutrient, that was beautiful.
That's great.
It really
Yeah.
was nice.
And some flavor combinations you make, you'll be like, oh, that was awesome. And then other times you'll make it and it just won't work.
Yeah.
It'll be different to how you sort of see it in your mind. Yeah. But I think the cool thing about that is just to try it anyway.
Yeah.
And the first time you're doing a particular flavor, just make a small batch. And then if you really like it, then you do it again. Yeah. Any more questions about mead? No? Oh, yes.
How do you put the flavors in? Do you just like at the beginning put it in and then filter it out when you put it into the thing?
Sure. So a lot of people get sort of lost with like, oh, how do I put the flavors in? But then they disintegrate and go mucky. And then I've got like bits in my jar. It's once you put things into a recipe, it's kind of weird sometimes to get them out. So my advice for you there is you just want the essence of the flavor. If you want it to be apple flavored, you don't put the whole apple in. You'd put the apple in at some point at the beginning of the process and you'd let it sit in there for how many days? Maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, until you see the color and the texture of the apple change. And then you'd know, oh, that's gone a little bit soft. It's probably finished, and you'd take it out. So you put it in there at the beginning of the process to extract the flavor and the essence of it, and then you take it out. Unless, of course, that's what you want. Unless you want to have a gloopy, sloppy thing with bits of broken down pear in it. Like, and the same thing with like mint. Like, you know, when you have a mojito and it looks delicious, and then maybe 4 hours later, the mint starts to look a little bit sad. Like, you sort of just have to know your ingredients and recognize when maybe they're starting to get a little bit funky. Yeah. A really good way to incorporate different flavors is just to do like a tea from it. So like, say, for example, I was going to do like a lemon myrtle flavored mead, which would be delicious, by the way. You would just do a really, really strong tea. So if I was going to make like that 5 litre there, I might fill up a whole cup full of chopped lemon myrtle leaves, full, and then just cover that with boiling water and then strain that off and have quite a strong tea, because you're trying to imagine the flavor that's distributed through the full amount. So I would just sort of guesstimate. So yeah, it's easy for me to say that because I've done it so much, I can just sort of do it in my brain. So what I would suggest you do is start with recipes, give it a try, and then over time you'll develop more confidence. Yeah.
Have you tried to carbonated?
I have, yep, and it was amazing. So I did a lily pilly champagne once, which was just, this is not on the topic of mead, it's just mead adjacent, where I crushed all the lily pillies up and then added sugar to that, and then added yeast to that, and then fermented that on my bench top until it was really frothy and active. And then I strained all the lily pilly out because I didn't want it to break down and get all gross and blech. So I had kind of like a lily pilly concentrate with sugar in it and all the flavor of the lily pilly. And then I continued that on just with a wine, like a basic wine kit. And then when that was finished fermenting, then I bottled it and carbonated it, and it was exquisite. So I didn't bring any tonight, but a beer bottle that you can get from just homebrew shops with a bale top on it.
Yeah, sorry, I just know that I know with ginger beers and lemonade, I had a hard time stopping mine. That, you know, if I didn't make a batch and drink it within 5 days, when you open them, they would just.
Yeah, so there's 3 options there. The first thing is you can add a Camden tablet, which is a chemical. It's a very, very small tablet, which is also used to sterilize water when you go hiking and you're drinking water from creeks and things like that. They're actually quite safe.
Okay.
They don't really have much of a taste. So you can use them. I have used them and they're quite fine. Tiny little Camden tablet, pop it in and that'll stop it from fermenting. The second thing you can do is you can refrigerate it. You have to have an enormous fridge to store 30 liters of ginger beer, so you can refrigerate it, and that also works really well. The third thing you can do is you can just let it ferment in a big container until it stops fermenting and then bottle it.
All right.
So there's always ways around it. But I think the topic of exploding bottles is really important. So if you have if you've made a ginger beer, and I've put a ginger beer into this bottle and it's not fully fermented and it's full of sugar, it's likely that it will explode. So that's really, really important. You have to be really careful with unfermented sugar in pressurized bottles. The best advice I have for you to do that is, if you're making ginger beer for the first time, follow a recipe. I don't really make ginger beer because I prefer ginger beer very, very sweet. And if you don't want to drink artificial sweeteners, I just don't really make ginger beer. Yeah, but exploding bottles is really scary, and people have been hurt. So the way that I get around that is with the bale top bottles, and with a bit of practice, you can just crack them and burp them, and then they won't explode. And you'll get quite used to cracking them just a little bit, and a lot of air will come out. And sometimes if you're a bit too slow, it'll squirt and go all over the wall. So you've got to be careful. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about catalysts now, because that's one of the things I wanted to cover. So when we're talking about wild fermentation, it's all about getting stuff that's in nature and fermenting with it. So if we wanted to make mead, if we wanted to make elderflower mead, walk me through the process. What will we do? Yep.
And you sieve them in a little bit of water to get all the bugs and tiny little spiders out and stuff.
If you want.
Beautiful
Yes.
bacteria and spiders.
No, do that. That's a good idea. Yeah. So if you live in an urban environment, I would suggest you wash your produce. just if there's any coal dust on it or any gross stuff you don't really want to be drinking. So you'd get your fresh flowers. The reason why I love working with fresh catalysts is because they're so active. If I put this into that in 2 days, it'd be frothing and so active in the summertime. They're amazing. And this is when you can introduce all sorts of wonderful fresh flavors. If you wanted to do a mint mead, you'd pick a whole bunch of mint from your garden, just the leaves off your mint bush, wash them, because they're all covered in bacteria too. Anything from your garden is all covered in bacteria. It's friendly bacteria. You want it in your body. It's good for you. You'd mix it up with the honey water and you'd leave it in that, and that would ferment after a while. And you take that all out of there. So there's so many things in your garden that you can use as a natural catalyst, as a natural source of bacteria. A lot of them, I only have specific uses though, and specific functions. So if I was going to make a drink out of this, I would make like maybe, you could make a mead, you could make a soda. So sodas are really fun. So you just get sugar and water. It's very easy. You mix it with whatever your flavor is. What's some other ingredients maybe for a soda? Rosella, yeah. Lemon myrtle.
Citrus peel.
Yep, I'll come back to citrus peel. Let's put a pin in that. Elderberry, yep, yep. Think flowers. Yep.
Chamomile.
Yep, amazing. Basil, pineapple sage.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
any flower that's sweet smelling. You wouldn't put like a spring onion flower in there because that's going to make your drink smell like sweet spring onions. Whatever sort of sweet smelling herb, pretty much any herb flowers, you can make a what do you call it? A soda with. So you get whatever your flowers are, you put them in sugar and water, and after 48 hours or so, with lots of stirring, getting back to the point of stirring, you need to stir, 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 stir. It'll start to develop a little bit of that foam on the top. You put it in even just like a soft drink bottle that you can feel when it's starting to get pressurized, and that'll turn into a fizzy drink. So these sorts of catalysts can be really fun because they can produce alcoholic drinks and non-alcoholic drinks, depending on how long you ferment them for, that have literally come from the bacteria and yeasts in your garden. You're drinking your garden, which is pretty cool, if you ask me.
Is there any water and sugar ratio? Yeah.
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about a wine called Tej. So Tej is one of my favorite types of wine. It's an Ethiopian wine. It's spelt T-E-J. And in this book, which I highly recommend, the author talks about them as one of the first recipes. So if you haven't heard of Sandor Katz, I'd recommend you get one of his books. You can have a look at this tonight if you want to have a squiz. This is a great way to start. And he talks about Tej as a simple recipe. It's literally as much sugar as tastes sweet to you. He doesn't really give a recipe. And it's just water and sugar, which tastes sweet, and you stir it and you stir it. And then once it gets really frothy and active, put it underneath an airlock and you've got wine. Like, it's as simple as that. You know, it doesn't have to be a specific ratio. He'll give you, there are suggestions in here, and there's heaps of recipes online that'll all be different.
Yes.
And just pick one and do it. Yeah, there's no perfect ratio. Yeah, if you want, you can take a picture of the recipe with your phone and take it home.
What's that book called?
This is called Wild Fermentation by Sandor Katz. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so they're catalysts. Other types of catalysts that you can use, this is a really cool one, which I've done once, which was really cool. Does anyone know what lerps are? No, lerps, L-E-R-P-S, lerps. So they're a tiny little insect which occur on gum trees, and they're like a type of scale. So they're a little tiny insect, and they sit on the leaves, and they cover themselves with a really, really sort of fragile layer of probably chitin or some sort of hard insect material that they make. So a little thing that sucks the sap out of the leaf, and they cover them with this protective hard coating. Yeah. And what they do is they suck all the liquid out of the leaf, and they eat the protein, and they chuck the rest out. So they literally will sit on the leaf and just pump out sugar water. And what will happen is the sugar water will evaporate, and it sort of forms like a crystallized deposit of sugar on the outside of the leaf.
And sometimes the ants come along and milk them for that.
You're thinking aphids.
Oh, yeah.
Close. Well, yeah, maybe they do. I don't know.
Ants will aphids, but ants will also farm scale.
Yeah, they probably do. What am I talking about? Anyway, so there'll be a gum tree and it'll be covered with lerps. And you'll look at the tree and go, what are all those birds doing? There's no flowers on that gum tree, or there's no fruits on that gum tree. What are they doing?
Helen has lerps killing off his swamp mahogany, and she has millions of them available.
Well, thanks, Helen. Let's all go over to Helen's house. And what you do,
Down for your lurks.
and what you do is you get just a little, your finger or a small implement, and you just scrape them off the leaf and you dry them out. And they're a fantastic catalyst because they're sugar that's just sitting in the environment, that's just in the air, just like breathing the air that's just been absorbed and dried out and crystallized. So like, it doesn't have to be a packet of yeast. If you want to be really wild, you can use lerps. You could juice the sugarcane in your backyard and use that because the stems are covered in yeast.
What about a little bit of eucalyptus?
Eucalyptus what?
Something edible.
What's edible?
There isn't any edible. Is there?
Well, there's actually, I've read about a native Australian ferment. So one of the few ferments that I'm aware of that Aboriginal people have been doing, it's called gum cider. So there's a type of gum tree called a cider gum, and they produce lots and lots of sweet, sappy liquid that comes out if they get cut to make a canoe or if they get damaged in a storm or whatever. And I've read that the sap flows down to the ground and it spontaneously ferments. And that's where the first corroborees occurred. That could be wrong. That could be hogwash, but I just heard it. So, there are all these, yeah, and there are so many traditional cultures and indigenous cultures that do fermentation as part of their everyday life. Like cocoa is a fermented product. Coffee is a fermented product. Cheese is a fermented product. Beer, like there's all these really important sacred foods that are all the result of fermentation. Yeah, sorry, I've gotten off track now. I'm just sort of waffling. Let me, yeah.
Pictures?
Oh, sure. They've disappeared.
We'll get them.
That's the one.
How many people have read Bill Mollison's book on fermentation and nutrition?
Now I can click on any of these. And they
Just start at the top and I'll just go through them. And I want to just show you through the rest of the stuff on the table too. So the top left, that's just a picture of a piece of fennel, a fennel flower. So that's another fantastic catalyst, is the pollen from fennel. So I went up to the Hunter Valley and the fennel is just growing everywhere. There's a horrible weed up there. And I see a weed and I go, oh, I'm going to make a drink out of that. So I went along and I harvested all the tops and just put it in some sugar water. And then I had a soda. And it sort of tasted a little bit like, what's that drink called? Sarsaparilla. It tasted a little bit like sarsaparilla. So no, because I didn't let it ferment for that long. So I just put it in water and sugar and let it get really bubbly and frothy and happy, and put it in a bottle with a bale top on it, and then put it in the fridge. And then I had my own soda, you know.
If you had it left it longer, it would ferment it.
Yes, you're getting it. Excellent. So if you started that fermentation with that fennel pollen and it started to get a frothy layer of bubbles on the top, that's telling you that all the bacteria and yeasts that were in the flowers, they've populated all the water and they're going gangbusters. That's when you put it into an airlock like this, or in a big drum if you want to make a huge batch of it, and you leave it be. And then in 6 months' time, you drink it. Or you can drink it the next day. You can drink it at any stage. But if you want to turn it into wine, you'd leave it to ferment until it's dry. Yeah, so that's just a picture of the start of the process. I find it quite fascinating and quite beautiful when you sort of let natural things just sort of ferment with a bit of sugar and water. You get all these amazing things. Keep clicking through. Maybe just click on the arrow. Or maybe just like hit the arrow keys on the keyboard. Maybe that'll take you to the next one. There we go. So that's the special water. I encourage you to make some special water when you're making some beer or some wine.
That's special.
It's special.
But no, I mean, you're quite.
Look, I think what I'm saying is what I'm saying is like, get quality ingredients. You know, use your rainwater from your rainwater tank, or your filtered water from your beautiful like mineralizer or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
An
like,
RO mineral added water filtration system.
yeah, yeah. Add some spice to your water, you know, have some fun with it. And a lot of people are really keen on fermentation, and they just want to learn, and they just want to be involved and see how the process happens. So involve other people. That's what I'm all about. That's why I did the mead ceremonies, because I could have just made it on my own and just had fun, but I wanted to involve all my friends. So we got naked and splashed some water around. Next one. Yeah, so that's the fennel the fennel soda that I was just talking
And
about.
above that is the froth.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sediment in there, but there's a lot of froth in there as well. Yeah. Next one. Yep, so that's when it's sort of just starting to get going. And one thing you've got to be a little bit careful is like, are they bubbles because I've just stirred it, or is it bubbles that have actually come from the fermentation itself? So what I usually do in the mornings, first thing in the morning after, you know, a nice warm summer evening, I'll go straight to my ferments and go, oh, have they started yet? Like I can probably even see some tiny, tiny little bubbles here. So you sort of get into the rhythm of stirring everything every day and sort of making things come to life. So that was a little bit earlier. So see how the bubbles are really, really fine? That's just when it's starting, and they get more bigger and chunkier. That's somewhere in the middle of the process. Yeah, keep going. It's very interesting, just pictures of bubbles. I think that might be it even. So sourdough. Okay, so this brings me to sourdough. I don't ferment all the time because life is busy and also it gets cold. So this is my sourdough starter that I have, which I started using a similar ritual. So this time it was at the Williams River, and it was a new moon, and it was exquisite, and the water was absolutely freezing. And we went into the water and we did a ritual anyway. So this has been, I've made injera, pancakes, crumpets, all sorts of things with this. If you're making sourdough, you can even put a little bit of sourdough into your oats of an evening and let them ferment overnight, and then make your boiled porridge for breakfast in the morning. So sourdough isn't just for bread. You know, you can use it for pancakes. If I have a whole bunch of sourdough starter that's really sour and I don't know what to do with it, I just make it into a flatbread and then serve it with a curry. So like if people are sort of going, oh, I never make sourdough, use it for other things. Use it in the place of any sort of yeast. So this has been sitting in the fridge, and see how it's kind of got like a bit of a blackish, sort of grayish color on the top. I brought that along tonight because I wanted to show you that that's not scary. It still smells good. Actually, pass this around and have a sniff. It's just sort of smells a bit like beer. It smells a bit sour and kind of like fermenty. As long as it doesn't smell like pungent and rotted, it's fine. Pardon? Yep, yep, yeah. So you curled your nose up at that. What did you smell?
My smells really crappy, so I was probably just trying to smell it better, but it smells sweet. Like, it's a sweet, like,
see, I smell sort of like vinegar in that, and that's because it's very, very sour, because it's been sitting in my fridge for a month or two. But as long as you don't see any mold, and even some molds are actually friendly. So there's a type of mold called Kahm yeast, K-A-H-M, which is a white surface mold that will form on quite a lot of ferments that have got fresh fruit and vegetables in them. And that's fine as well. So I guess like if you're freaking out about like mold on a ferment, just learn about the different types of molds and try and identify it. You don't have to chuck it out straight away.
How often do you feed that?
So in the summertime, I would feed that every day or every other day, because I would be using it in everything. And when I'm not feeding it, it just goes in the fridge.
Yeah.
So I haven't fed that for probably 2 months, and it's quite happy in the fridge like that. If you wanted to take better care of it than me and my busy life, I would probably feed it maybe once a month or once every couple of months. Oh, sorry, a couple of weeks, I mean.
So you just feed it for once and then chuck it back in.
You'd feed it once, let it become a little bit active, and then put it back in.
I've been in the fridge for a couple of months and I haven't fed it for a while.
Well, just bring it.
it.
If you have a quiet Sunday afternoon, bring it out, cut it in half, use the rest of it to make some flatbread or throw it in the compost, whatever, and just feed it a little bit of flour and it'll come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, don't be scared. Don't be scared if it smells funny, because you're not gonna, if you're gonna make a huge big batch of something, you've got to wake it up. You're gonna have to discard some of it anyway. You just want the essence of this to come to life.
A little bit more, like before you use a bit of it, you have to wake it up again, or you just use it.
As soon as this comes to room temperature, it'll start to come back to life again. As soon as I feed it, it'll start to come back to life again. So you can use it right then and there. Sometimes if it's been a long time, like this, maybe this will take a little bit longer. It might take a little bit longer time to sort of come back to life if it's been left alone. So you'll just give it a couple of meals. Yeah. Yeah, but it'll come back. Anyway, so that's sourdough. Another thing is sugars. So you can just use normal sugars just from the shop to ferment. Like if you're making kombucha, if you're making kefir, if you're making wine, tage, anything, you could just use raw sugar, that's fine. If you can, try and get some fun sugar. So this is jaggery, and jaggery is just sugarcane juice that's been boiled and a little bit of lime has been added to it to make it crystallize. So it's kind of like very, very, very raw sugar, next level raw sugar. And it's really fun to work with because it's got lots of minerals in it. So if you're making things that need, the yeast needs a little bit of mineral, needs a bit of extra help, get some fun sugar. Ah, cool, sure. Well, this is really good for making sodas with. So I'm a huge fan of sodas because they're just a really cool way to use naturally occurring bacteria from your garden and be ingesting it. So if you use raw sugar and just a little bit of this, it just gives it a bit more strength to the bacteria and makes them active more quickly.
What about sugar that, sorry. Do you use just that instead of?
No. I use it as a supplement. So like if I was going to make this amount of mead, or sorry, not mead, tage, if I was going to make normal just sugar wine, which is called tage, I would use mostly raw sugar for that and just maybe a few tablespoons of that, just to give it a bit of body. And also like a bit of flavor complexity too, because raw sugar is pretty boring. I've also got some other ferments here, which I'll just quickly run through and then I might wrap it up, unless you want me to keep going. Oh yeah, okay. All right, so this is turmeric paste. Who grows turmeric at home? Who finds that when you dig it up, after a couple of months, it starts to grow again? No? Is that just me?
Technically, apparently loses its potency very quickly after harvesting.
Yeah.
So you really should process it in some way.
So I ferment it. I do a ferment with it. So all I do is when I harvest on my turmeric, I'll shred it up really coarse, just either with a veggie thingamajig, thank you, or I'll just blitz it through my food processor. And then you just basically make sauerkraut with it. Pretty much the same recipe as making sauerkraut. You just add a ratio of salt to it. Just look up, you know, if you're making sauerkraut, just borrow the same salt recipe from sauerkraut and you press it down so that there can be no contact with the air with the turmeric. So it's covered by a layer of brine. Does everyone sort of understand what that process is about? Pushing it down and the brine covers it. So you just do that and ferment it for a couple of weeks. And what it will do is while it ferments, it will produce lactic acid and acetic acid. No, sorry, not lactic acid, just acetic acid. And that's like a form of vinegar and it will preserve your turmeric. This has been in the fridge for 12 months and it's still fresh as a daisy.
Does it make it taste better?
It makes it more kind of like more chilled out or more relaxed. Like it's not as pungent. Yeah, of course you can. It sort of just makes it more, yeah. It's like with cheese. Like cheese just turns milk into something else. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a really, really good way to preserve your harvest. Yeah, it makes it more intense. Yeah. And you can do that with ginger, you can do that with Chinese keys, you can do it with galangal, you can do it with garlic, you can do it with all your really, really pungent herbs. You just shred them up and the wild bacteria that are already on the turmeric and in the garlic and on the surfaces of the blah, blah, blah. Yeah, a bit of salt, yeah. Yeah.
So if I was going to go home and Google recipe, that is called turmeric or just fermented turmeric?
You would call that lacto-fermented turmeric paste. Yeah, so that process of being submerged under a salty brine and the air being excluded from it, that is called lacto-fermentation. Maybe it is lactic acid, that would make sense. And that is a really useful process because it preserves the life of your fruit and veg. I also do the Yep. Ginger. Yep. I also make a really, really pungent and intense chili sauce. So I get, and you all have a sniff if you want. So this is just red chilies. I do a red and a green, and it's the same process again. It's just the fresh produce of the, the turmeric or the chilies or whatever. You shred them up. I've taken the seeds out. I just wanted just the flavor and not so much the heat. And then you add salt and you put it under a brine and it will ferment. And then I've just blitzed it so that it's a nice smooth sauce. And that's also an excellent way to preserve your chilies. And I really like chili sauce because it's really easy to like just put a little bit of it in your meal or serve, like put a little bit on your dumplings or whatever.
You can really smell the cat.
It makes it more developed or something, like it sort of makes the flavors kind of, I can't say more than that, just developed. Yeah, so just a little bit. So when you salt the chili, the salt through osmosis will draw the liquid out of the chilies and produce a little bit of its own brine. And if you're making a big enough batch, you could probably just apply a bit of pressure and it would be covered by its own brine. But because I was making just a small batch, I had to just add a little bit of water to make a bit more brine so that it would be submerged under a layer of brine.
That's pretty much the Tabasco sauce.
I think Tabasco sauce has got like some vinegar added and some other things added. Nice and simple. Yeah. You don't need like fancy herbs that are like secret recipe. Just use the chilies out of your garden, and that's chili, salt, and water.
I accidentally put my finger in the lid.
So that's a good question.
You've got good bacteria, I'm sure.
So the question about keeping it submerged and like that whole setup, I do it all with thrifted material. So I just get a glass jar. So let's just say this one here. It's better, actually, we'll use this one. It's better if your jar has got straight edges.
Yeah.
And if you can get a really, really big one like this one, but see how this one comes in?
Yeah.
You want to have a straight edge. And what you would do, let's just imagine this has got a straight edge. You put all your veggies in there, your shredded chilies or your turmeric or whatever. You lay them in there with your salt. And then you'd get another vessel. This isn't going to fit, bugger. And you'd put it in there and that would go down, and this would sort of form a bit of a flat surface that would press everything down. If you can go to the op shop and you can get 2 glass things that fit exactly inside each other, you'll be in heaven.
Yeah.
You can also use food grade plastic, which I do. And what you do is you take your top off and you cut a piece of plastic that's just within the size of your vessel. And then you drop that into the bottom, and then you just put a smaller, like a weight on it or something like that. Yeah, so let's just imagine that I've got a jar. Oh, hang on, let's use this one. Got my jar in there. That'll work. Got my jar in there. And you've got all your things pressed down. You've got a little bit of brine that's coming up and submerging under everything underneath. All you need to do is just cover it. So put a piece of cheesecloth on it with a rubber band and yeah. And that's it. That's all you do. You've got your things in your brine, they're fermenting on the bench, and you pull them out of there and you turn them into a sauce whenever you feel like it.
Is the plastic bags full of water?
Yeah. Yep.
And then
Yep.
that sort of like does that out to the side and.
Yep. Well put. It does the
Yeah.
A single plastic bag is a big problem because you get a hole, it can ruin your whole lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at least double bag.
Yeah, the bagging method works really well. The thing with all fermentation things is you'll work out what you like. So just, make it up. You don't have to buy expensive fermentation kits or anything like that. Just go to the op shop and get something secondhand.
Those flowers down there next.
Yes, I want to know about stuff.
Oh, sorry, this was just about the flowers you can use from your garden to make herb sodas. This is passion fruit marigold. Smell it. Smell it, it's incredible.
Now, if anybody wants that, I have one of those I need to get rid of too.
Okay, this one is a little bit, I'm a little bit nervous to share this with you because this one's actually a little bit vulnerable and ugly. But that's
Can we make
okay.
Guesses beforehand as to what it
Yes,
is?
please guess.
I think it's some sort of soya bean or tempeh type thing.
Okay. Any other guesses?
An ugly one. Yeah.
So this is not a wild ferment, sadly. If that gives, that's probably not a very good hint at all. Shall I just tell you? This is miso paste.
Oh, and you've made it.
And the smell is amazing.
Wow.
So just before I open it and let you all look inside, let me just explain a little bit. So in order to make miso, actually, this is a really great example of when you have a transformation of a fairly boring ingredient into a really incredible, sumptuous, rich umami flavor. So fermentation isn't just one thing that happens. It's not just sugar turned into alcohol through yeasts. Sauerkraut isn't just one thing. Quite often there's a whole bunch of organisms that work in succession with each other, and they all produce different molecules and compounds that create complexity and richness and gorgeousness. And like, you know how when you cook things and like all these chemical reactions happen when you caramelize stuff? It's the same idea, but it's done by bacteria and yeasts. So to make miso, you have salt, just plain old salt, soybeans, and rice that's been inoculated with a very specific type of mold. And again, when we think of mold, people go, it's going to kill you, it's dead. Mold is just yeast, and yeast is just a type of fungi. So decolonize your fear of fungi and yeasts, because they're fine if you treat them right. So what this will do is the yeast, which is coating the rice, it will ferment the starches in there, and they'll convert them to sugar. So the same mold that is used to make miso is also used to make sake. And another thing called amazake, which is like a sweet rice dessert, and tempeh, and soy sauce, and all these other things. So it's this very, very versatile type of mold that ferments food. Anyway, so you have rice that's been inoculated with the mold, soybeans, and salt, and that's literally it.
And for how long?
So the longer, the darker it becomes and the more rich it becomes. So you can, a sweet miso or a young miso might be 6 months old, or maybe 8 months old. And then when you get into the year, 2, 3 years, that's when it gets really dark. You get like red, you get brown, depending on the types of grains that you've used. If you've used black rice, it'd be a really dark color. If you've used red rice, it'd be more like an orangey or a red kind of color.
And it doesn't have to be, it should be in a sealed container, but it doesn't have to have brine over the top of it.
No. So this one's a little bit different because brine is all about reducing lactic acid production and vinegar stuff. This is a completely different playing field. This is mold doing its thing.
It's like cheese almost, isn't it?
Yeah. And so some cheeses get brined, so they get stuck in a brine, and that's how they absorb their salt and things like that. So there's kind of like, there's no hard and fast answer with fermentation, because all these different processes are borrowed from everywhere to create these different things. Anyway, I'll show you this. This is just a piece of plastic that I've wrapped over a piece of cardboard that I've cut to the size of the inside of this vessel here. And that is really just to stop flies and bugs from getting in. So that's really just to, because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to pick out things. This is where it gets really ugly. So just stay with me, people, because this is just the cover. What I want you to do is don't look at it, just smell it.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of cheesy. I'll show everyone on.
And sourdough.
Can you smell it? Yeah. Here, pass it around so I'm not walking around to everyone. Yeah, so like the reason why it's vulnerable and ugly is because the fermentation process has happened really slowly. And when it ferments, there's a little bit of brine that gets produced. But then over time, because it slowly dries out, that brine kind of becomes
Absorb
solid.
something.
It's sort of, there's lots of processes that happen. So it kind of looks like it's covered in a layer of scum. But look, some things in life that are the most beautiful are also quite ugly. You know, when you've got to go through ugly stages in life before you can get to the nice stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's my first ever batch of miso. I've never made miso before, and I'm quite happy with that. And that's now ready to eat.
How old is that?
That's about a year. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's my baby.
A 1-year-old baby.
Yeah.
Chris, do you have to do, once you've done that, do you have to do anything?
I don't know what my options are now.
You want to eat it before it gets to its terrible too.
You definitely, yes. Does anyone curl their nose up at that?
It reminds me of the sourdough.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where when it's in the shop, it's all in a pretty package and it's all been mixed together, so it's all, you know, homogenized and normal looking. Yeah. Sorry. It depends on the type, but you know, minimum 1 year. Yeah.
And you can
Yeah.
buy 5-year-old.
You can. There's a producer who used to make miso in the Blue Mountains, who made it up there, and he made exquisite miso, but I'm not sure if he's still going anymore. So if you know a local producer who makes miso, get some, because it's really, really magical stuff. Yeah.
There is someone down the Central Coast who I think runs miso making classes.
Yeah. Yeah. There's quite a lot of miso making classes up in the Gold Coast and Byron kind of space as well. Yeah. Yeah. So that's miso. Miso is really cool. That's probably about it for me, unless you have any other questions. Yeah, I guess like maybe closing comments is like I've spoken about a lot of things tonight, and there's been like a lot of conflicting messages because that's just what art is like. But what I would encourage you to do is start with what's in your backyard. Go for a walk and see what sweet flowers are there, and make a soda. Pick some flowers. Like if I was going to make a soda, I just pick all the heads off this and then throw them into a jar and then cover them with water and a little bit of sugar, and then stir that. And maybe after 2 days, you'll start to see a bit of foam. You'd take all the elderflower out because you'd start to see the elderflowers starting to go a bit translucent and start to break down. That's when you take them out. And yeah.
Does it matter what spoon you use to stir, whether it's steel?
As long as it's clean. Clean. So my message about cleanliness and sterility is, yeah, I'd say cleanliness, not sterility. You know, I think a lot of people freak out about things being sterile all the time. If you're making really large quantities of things, cleanliness is really important. So if you're making like heaps of beer, then you'd want to be very clean. But there are other things that you can make that are a little bit more forgiving. So beer is pretty hard and fast. If it gets stuff in it, it's going to go off. But things like mead, they're a little bit easier because they've got a little bit of latitude and they're a bit more forgiving. Things like sauerkraut is very forgiving. Kimchi is very forgiving. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Make some tage, make some soda. It's really yummy. It's really fun. And if you have any questions, come and see me after.
Thank you.
Yay!
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Now I've given up all difficult ferments, and now what I do is I call it my KFC. It's got all these herbs and spices. And I make about 3 litres at a time, and it's got ginger that's been boiled for 45 minutes. Another lot of herbs that are sort of like ground, cardamom, saffron, hibiscus, whatnot. And then there's another pot which is fresh thyme, ginger. No, not thyme, ginger. Mint, thyme, and strawberry leaves. And I found that on its 3rd day, on a bit of honey. just a bit, a bit of honey over 3 litres is not much. But I found on the 3rd day, it starts a basic ferment. So now what I do is I make sure I've got it ahead of time. So by the time I'm drinking it, psst, it's nice, but it doesn't actually do psst, or have a lot of sugar in it.
Sounds good. I've made a couple of wild beers. So I haven't used any grain or any kits or anything like that. I went over to Lockie's house and we harvested a whole bunch of sugar cane and we juiced the sugar cane, and then I boiled that down into like a malt almost.
Yeah.
And then I used that as my malt, and then I added all my herbs from home and just experimented and made it up, and it was awesome. Sometimes the best things are just accidents.
What is malt?
Malt is grain, so wheat or barley or whatever grain, and it's been sprouted, or it's been malted. So all the starch in the seed gets converted to sugar through the action of enzymes. And then at that point, generally the seeds are dried and ground, and then there's water that's used to extract the sugar out of them, and then that's boiled down into a syrup.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Or you could just get some sugarcane juice and just use that.
Yes.
Which is what I did, and it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. I think what we'll do is